A Fox News alert on major developments out of Washington with new fallout from explosive allegations by President Trump about his predecessor. This as the White House gets ready to announce its new executive order on travel and immigration just a few moments from now. Take a deep breath. We're here on Monday. Hello, everybody. Great to see you. I'm Jenna Lee.
I'm John Scott, and boy, do we have a lot to cover. The president calling for a congressional investigation into his claim that President Obama wiretapped Trump Tower and the Trump campaign. Mr. Trump provides no evidence for the allegations, which are sparking fierce denials from the current director of the FBI, the former director of the CIA, the former National Intelligence Director, and a spokesman for President Obama. But despite all that, key members of Congress say they will honor the president's request. We have live Team Fox coverage. Ed Henry is covering the revised executive order. But we start with Chief White House correspondent John Roberts.
John, good morning to you. In the White House looking to change the news cycle yet again with the president signing that new executive order on the immigration ban about a half an hour from now. Democrats are already lining up to bash him over it, but the White House believes that they have thought this one out carefully enough that it will pass legal muster and will also, most importantly, minimize the potential for people to unintentionally get caught up in it as they did the first executive order. Meantime, the White House continues to push for a full investigation into the potential that the president was wiretapped at Trump Tower during the closing weeks of the campaign, saying that the Obama administration ordered that wiretap. The president waking up on Saturday morning to tweet out, quote, "How low has President Obama gone to tap my phones during the very sacred election process? This is Nixon Watergate, bad or sick guy." Current and former officials are lining up to push back against the accusation, saying no one ordered wiretaps of then-candidate Donald Trump, saying there was no directive from the so-called FISA court to bug Trump Tower. But there are enough reports of telephone intercepts of Trump campaign officials, including Lieutenant General Michael Flynn and possibly some other campaign officials and advisors back in the summertime, that people are saying, well, you know, maybe it's possible that they could have bugged Trump Tower. This morning, Kellyanne Conway said the whole thing should be investigated by the intelligence committees on Capitol Hill. Listen here.
Let's investigate this and see where it leads. So let's have the House and Senate Intelligence Committees do their work and think about whether to include this. But the president has made clear that he would like there to be an investigation of any possible abuses, and that hopefully that oversight activity will clarify for everyone.
There was no hard evidence, at least at this point, that Trump Tower was bugged. The seriousness of this, if it did happen, is already being articulated by some senior Republicans on Capitol Hill. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina over the weekend saying if this is true, this could be the biggest scandal since Watergate. John?
Wow. John Roberts at the White House. John, thank you.
So we have that going on. In just a few minutes, the White House will announce its revised executive order on travel and immigration. The first travel ban, as you know, faced a wave of legal challenges leading to its suspension by the courts back in January. Continuing our Fox News team coverage now, we have Ed Henry, who's live in Washington. Ed?
Good to see you, Jenna. I'm in front of the Ronald Reagan building because the White House is sort of not taking the lead on this, at least publicly. They're trying to hand it off to three key cabinet departments who will actually be implementing this executive order. So both in style and substance, they're trying to have some tweaks that will make sure this passes both legal muster but also political muster. The fallout, you remember, controversy at airports around the nation when the first executive order went into effect. This time they're tweaking the fact that Iraq will no longer be one of the Muslim majority countries on that list, also making it much more clear this time that green card holders will not be affected at all. Kellyanne Conway a short time ago giving Fox viewers a preview.
It has an effective date of March 16th, and there are the legal permanent residents were always excluded from it, but that's made much more clear now. If you have travel docs, if you actually have a visa, if you're a legal permanent resident, you are not covered under this particular executive action. Also, Iraq is no longer on the list based on their enhanced screening and reporting measures. Also, Syrian refugees are treated the way all refugees are.
And notice that she said it will take effect middle of the month rather than immediately. Remember, there was a big show of President Trump himself at the end of week one in the Trump White House signing the first executive order to put it right there at the White House, but also to send the message they had to move quickly to prevent terrorists from getting into the country. This time they're letting it breathe and saying it's going to take a couple of weeks to implement. Clearly this time trying to show the signal that they're being more careful about implementing in a much different way. That's why you'll see Rex Tillerson here at the Ronald Reagan Building from the State Department, Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, and Secretary Kelly from the Homeland Security Department, trying to focus on the idea that they're working out the details much more carefully this time, Jenna.
We'll be watching, Ed. Thank you.
Now to more reaction to the president's wiretapping claims, with White House advisors backing him up, while former Obama administration intelligence officials deny those allegations.
Let's get to the bottom of it. That is the president's entire point. You have various incredible news sources showing that there was politically motivated activity all during the campaign and suggesting that there may be more there. The president's entire point is that the people deserve to know. So why not include in the existing investigations into Russia this aspect, that whether or not this actually happened?
There was no such wiretap activity mounted against the president-elect at the time, or as a candidate, or against his campaign.
Joining us now is Brett Baer, the anchor of Special Report. I guess what everybody's looking for here, Brett, is corroboration of what the president is suggesting happened. Do we have any?
We don't, and it's not definitive. We have what all of these officials have said publicly. We have word that the FBI director is saying there needs to be some pushback internally to the notion that President Obama ordered wiretaps. But what we don't have is definitive proof. We have a call for an investigation. The interesting thing is that the president could answer the question very easily by calling up and asking his officials what exactly happened and deciding whether he's going to declassify that or not. What we do have, however, John, and was overlooked in the Clapper interview on Meet the Press, is a statement by the former head of Director of National Intelligence that they saw no evidence of collusion between any campaign person on the Trump team or any American with the Russians. No evidence of collusion. That, in the wake of all these tweets and the wiretap, did it happen, did not happen, has been lost, I think, in the shuffle.
And the suggestion, I guess, is not that this was some kind of a wiretap to find out what the Trump campaign was up to. It would have been in connection with a criminal investigation or an investigation into any relationship between the Trump campaign and the Russians, right?
Yeah, I mean, we know that there were investigations ongoing. We know that there was some sort of investigation. Could it have been a narrow request to FISA to ask for a specific computer that they believed was tied to a Russian bank? Could it have been? Yes, it could have been, but do we have definitive word that that request happened or that investigation went forward? No, we don't. We have various reports. We have what officials are saying publicly, and we have now a call from the White House for an investigation that, frankly, the president could answer himself with a couple of phone calls.
But there would have had to have been a judge, or the FISA court would have had to approve this wiretap order, correct?
By law, that is exactly what happens. The request goes to the FISA court, which, by the way, is top secret, so top secret, nobody even knows where the FISA court is in Washington, D.C. But they would the request would go in. There would have to be substantial evidence to get to that point that a judge would then say, yes, go ahead and do it. We should point out that by the time you get to a request for FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, court, most times, I think it's only 0.1% or something, get turned down by the judge. So, if that happened, you would wonder whether it went forward. We just don't know the specifics of whether it happened or didn't, and we're trying to get to the bottom of it. You have various people saying some investigation happened, and clearly, over the past couple of months, there have been many stories that have cited anonymous officials about the lengths of that investigation into the Trump campaign.
Well, we do know that there was surveillance of the Russian ambassador that apparently snared Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor, right?
Yeah, and you can go back in New York Times stories for months that cite various elements of intercepts. Well, that has to come from someplace. So we don't know the answer to that yet, and I'm guessing that over time we will. That said, you have this White House moving forward, and it's calling for an investigation, and now you have this executive order, and that is going to get a lot of attention, and you have a rollout up on Capitol Hill of Obamacare. So there are big things here besides those tweets that happened over the weekend, but I think there's a lot of Democrats and some Republicans expressing concern about how the president got that message out.
But again, you're saying that if the president really wants to get to the bottom of it, all he has to do is pick up the phone and call, what, the National Security Agency or the Director of National Intelligence?
Director of National Intelligence. And you had former NSA General Mike Hayden on a show this morning saying that perhaps he forgot he was president and had that power when he put out those statements. So I think there's more to this story. We just don't know where it goes, and we independently can confirm that those requests ever happened.
Yeah. Hard not to get out in front of the actual facts here. Brett Baer will be looking for more tonight on Special Report. Thanks,
John.
As Brett was just mentioning, there are a few big stories to get to. North Korea is one of them, firing a new round of missiles as the U.S. and South Korea conduct massive military drills. How should the test impact the Trump administration? How should the Trump administration respond? Also, tensions reportedly rising inside the White House amid a series of negative headlines. Is the press derailing the Trump administration's agenda? Our media panel will take a look at this ahead. Well, this just in, North Korea firing 4 ballistic missiles off its eastern coast in the last 24 hours, an apparent reaction to military drills by the U.S. and South Korea. South Korean and Japanese officials say the missiles went just over 600 miles, 3 of them landing in waters that Japan claims as its exclusive economic zone. The Trump administration, which is working on its North Korea policy, likely to see these tests as a provocation, but we're going to wait to see what they say. James Acton is co-director of the Nuclear Policy Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Takes a look at some of these missile tests. So, James, what do you note about the timing of this and the type of missiles used?
Well, the timing is significant because it took place during the beginning of the annual large exercises that the US and South Korea hold. And it's very common for North Korea to conduct launches at that time. The big question, as you say, is what type of missile this is. There's been unverified reports this morning that US officials have been saying that these are existing Scud-type missiles that North Korea has tested many times before. If that's the case, this is a serious provocation and one we shouldn't overlook. But it's also less threatening than the development of new capabilities that would significantly enhance the danger to South Korea and the United States.
That's interesting context for us. That being the case, as we wait for a little bit more information on exactly what transpired with this test, if you were speaking to the Trump team, what is your best advice about how to react to this sort of provocation?
Well, a couple of thoughts. I mean, the first thing is the State Department has come out and condemned the test. To the best of my knowledge, the White House itself hasn't done so yet. I think it's important for allies in the region, not only South Korea, but also Japan, to hear the president actually condemn these tests. Secondly, if this is, as I said, a lot is going to depend here on what type of missile this was. But assuming that these were existing Scud-type missiles, what I would look at is accelerating the deployment of missile defenses in the region. Japan, which, these missiles were fired towards Japan. Japan has started to think about acquiring the THAAD missile defense system. I think that is a proportionate response to North Korea's missile program, and I would try to work with the Japanese on potentially speeding up that deployment timeline.
Okay, so missile defense is a big topic, not only overseas, but also here as well in the United States. I know that's something that you look into quite a bit. We also have some new information coming out of Iran as well, James, as we sort of toggle between these two places. And this is just the news that we have breaking from our Pentagon team, that it's been overlooked that Iran has actually launched 2 short-range ballistic missiles over the weekend, and it looks like these missiles are of a certain type that haven't been tested in at least 2 years. So if this indeed is the case, and our Pentagon team has confirmed it, what goes through your mind if you hear North Korea's test firing some missiles, we're waiting for more information, but then Iran perhaps also pushing the envelope at the same time?
Well, again, I mean, you know, this is. I don't have any information about this Iran launch, so all I can talk is in very general terms. Again, what I'd say here is, if we're dealing with short-range Iranian missiles that can't, for example, reach Israel, then that is something that I wouldn't be inclined to escalate the situation. If we're dealing with longer-range missiles that can reach US allies in the region, including Israel, then I think a proportionate response is the imposition of further sanctions on Iran related specifically to the missile program. That's something the Obama administration did. That's something the Trump administration has done so far. I think it's important not to let longer range Iranian missile tests go unchallenged, and sanctions on entities specifically related to those tests seems to me to be a reasonable and proportionate response.
Why do you think North Korea and Iran are choosing this time to make these tests?
Well, I think they probably have quite different reasons. I mean, in the case of North Korea, as I've already mentioned, there's these big annual US-South Korean military exercises going on. North Korea always responds to those tests with missile provocations, or at least it has done for the last few years. In the case of Iran, you know, Iran has been conducting tests periodically. While it's remained in full compliance with the nuclear deal that's been reached. And as I say, how significant these tests are in Iran depends very much on the range of these missiles. And if these are shorter range missiles that really don't have implications for Israel or other allies, then you know, while I wouldn't want to downplay the significance, these tests wouldn't be serious threats to security.
I know you're just getting this information, as are we, but I just want to share a little bit of what we have from our Pentagon, that from Iran specifically, these are short-range missiles. But apparently they have a new, quote-unquote, active seeker helping the missile locate ships at sea. This is according to an official speaking to our Lucas Tomlinson. And so as I'm reading through just some of the editorial that we have, James, is that they were test firing at barges. And because the waterways around Iran are so crucial and because our ships are in the region, does that change the way that you would feel about a short-range missile test?
Well, again, it depends a lot on the nature of the Iranian technology. I mean, Iran is not the first country to try and have the ability to attack US ships at sea. And US ships at sea are armed with some pretty effective short-range missile defenses, such as the Standard Missile 6, precisely to be able to repel missile attacks. So, you know, again, if they're firing at barges which are fixed objects, that's a much easier task than firing at a moving ship at sea, especially a ship defended by pretty advanced missile defenses. So, you know, I mean, if I had access to the classified information on this, which I don't, I would delve into the details. I would want to know what kind of seeker this was, how accurate it was, how reliable it was. It's very, very hard in the abstract to assess how much of a security threat this poses to US forces.
And an important thought for us as well as we look through some of the headlines to get to some of the specifics as well. James, good of you to work through some of this news with us as we get it, and we look forward to having you back on the program. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Still waiting for that, the new executive orders on immigration. That should be just a few minutes away. In the meantime, President Trump's Russia headaches are not going away. And now, as he levels sensational accusations at former President Obama, Russia's president is speaking out about all this. What Vladimir Putin has to say. The White House sticking to its guns, demanding that Congress, already investigating Russian meddling in the presidential election, also examine whether former President Barack Obama abused his executive powers in connection with the campaign. Meantime, the Associated Press reporting today that a spokesman for Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia, quote, should not be in any way linked to U.S. domestic issues. So exactly what is Russia up to right now? Joining us now to discuss that, Ariel Cohen, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Can we start with the premise that anything that, you know, upends life in the United States or makes things difficult for the U.S. government is something that Russia likes to see?
Absolutely. Russia is not America's friend, and I think we saw very clearly in the Munich conference last month that the top tier of our leadership, Vice President Pence, the national security elite, including Senator McCain, and the Secretary of Defense, everybody who was there in Munich was very clear that we are not buying Russian agenda in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. Russia is pillaging industrial assets in the occupied, de facto occupied Donbas province of Ukraine. And also in the Middle East, we saw that Russia went above the call of duty, above and beyond the call of duty by bombing Aleppo and causing tremendous devastation there. Having said that, I think President Trump keeps the door open for cooperation with Russia in fighting ISIS. But you're absolutely right. Moscow would love nothing better than our executive branch, the intelligence community, the Defense Department, and the military all engage in some kind of a conflict about what Russia did and what Russia did not do. And I think we are investigating it, and we should be investigating it, and the truth will come out, whatever that truth is. And it's too early to talk about what it is, but as Fox News just recently pointed out, there are no incriminating evidence so far.
Yeah. Well,
that we can tell.
As you well know, President Trump has been accused of being too cozy with the Russians, or maybe Vladimir Putin specifically. In your view, is that the case?
Well, the question is, what is too cozy? And the question also is, we live, hopefully, in the land of the law. Were any laws broken? And who broke them? If it wasn't President Trump, if it's somebody on his team, so far we didn't see that, not even in the case of the National Security Advisor, ex-National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. So the question is, how much is it politicized? How much something really was going on? It's not up to me to answer these questions. It's up to the intelligence community, the counterintelligence divisions of the FBI, etc., and to the extent there is a congressional investigation, up to the Congress.
So when the spokesman for Vladimir Putin says, you know, that they shouldn't be blamed for involvement in affairs in the U.S., what are they saying?
They're looking at the swirl of accusation. They're looking at politicization. They would like, as far as I could tell by visiting Russia and talking to senior people there, they would like to get to business. They would like to turn the page on the very sour relationship that existed during the Obama administration era and start doing something more positive that would be in their interests. So, the Russians are all about their interests. So, for example, lifting the sanctions that are economically hurting them, they would love to do that. Finding some kind of a arrangement for them to stay in Syria to support Bashar al-Assad. They think that we may be accepting that. Boosting their allies, the Kurds in the Middle East, and generally lifting the Russian profile in the Middle East to the parity with the United States. And they do some nasty things, like supplying the long-range S-300 anti-ballistic missile system to Iran, and we see Iran misbehaving again and again in the Middle East.
We could talk about it all day, and I'm sure we'll have you back to talk about it some more. Fascinating times right now. Ariel Cohen, Atlantic Council, thank you.
In the meantime, a terror trial unfolding now in New York City with the suspected al-Qaeda operative accused of plotting attacks on the U.S. military. We're live with the story on that. Plus, President Trump's war with the media intensifying as he claims the press is on a witch hunt. Our media panel weighs in on that ahead. Just after 11:30 Eastern Time, we have news now that President Trump has signed the new executive order on immigration. We expected it to happen around this time, and apparently it has behind closed doors. What you're seeing on your screen there is the press room for the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. That's in the Ronald Reagan building, and that's where we expect a few cabinet members, key cabinet members we should mention. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Kelly, and Attorney General Sessions. They're going to be announcing together as a team this revised executive order on travel into this country. We'll be waiting and watching for details on that. When they step to the podium, we'll bring you there.
President Trump's temper reportedly rising over some recent leaks, setbacks, and media coverage as he unleashes wiretapping allegations against former President Obama over the weekend. His surrogates defending him today.
The other thing that's going on here is we have this double standard for anonymous sources. The media love to use anonymous sources for anything and everything that could possibly be derogatory, negative for this president and his administration, and yet they refuse to give any credibility to such sources when it may be something positive or exculpatory. The other double standard is investigations. You have Democrats every single day saying, investigate, investigate, special prosecutors investigate. Well, then what are they afraid of here? Let's investigate this and see where it leads.
Meantime, the Washington Post reports today that President Trump has been in a rage lately, writing, quote, "At the center of the turmoil is an impatient president increasingly frustrated by his administration's inability to erase the impression that his campaign was engaged with Russia to stem leaks about both national security matters and internal discord, and to implement any signature achievements." This account of the administration's tumultuous recent days is based on interviews with 17 top White House officials, members of Congress, and friends of the president, many of whom requested anonymity to speak candidly. Joining us now, Matt Visor, Deputy Washington Bureau Chief of the Boston Globe, and Rich Lowry, political editor at the National Review and a Fox News contributor as well. So that quote that I just read, Matt, based on, 17 anonymous sources at the White House and elsewhere, does it seem accurate to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Trump, has had he had a very good Tuesday night, last week. The rest of the week sort of got taken up by other news stories that I think drew a lot of his frustration, that he was unable to control the narrative for the remainder of the week. So I think that the question is sort of going forward how he recalibrates. He does have a habit and an ability to sort of change what we focus on, as we saw with his tweets on Saturday morning. But you can only do that for so long when there are still open questions about Russia and a variety of agencies and congressional committees who are looking into those.
But Rich, as you well know, virtually no president is happy with the media coverage that his administration gets. Why is this one any different?
Well, I think the level of hostility is no question higher than we've seen with any president ever before. And as Matt alludes to, it's understandable that Trump is upset because he has Tuesday night his best moment as president. The only thing that came close was the Gorsuch nomination, and it's immediately swallowed up by more contention over Russia. And there's kind of this love-hate relationship going on because Trump really cares about the coverage. He's very good at manipulating the media. So he throws these tweets out Saturday that he knows are going to drive the coverage in a way that he thinks is more favorable to him. The media gets in a tizzy about it, is upset about it for some understandable reasons, because these are allegations that appear to be unfounded, or at least they're searching for the evidence to back them up now. But the media loves it. It drives ratings, it drives conversation, it drives Sunday show debate. So both sides in this war are engaged in this kind of love-hate dynamic.
The surrogates for the Trump campaign, Matt, were saying over the weekend that any time that the administration finds itself on solid footing, as Rich said, as it did Tuesday night, that all of a sudden there will come out what the Trump campaign calls false stories or fake news. Is there anything to that?
I mean, I think there's a degree of scrutiny of the Trump administration, but I don't know that any of the things there's too much evidence of fake news. If you think back to the Flynn situation, the Post had 9 sources on that, and it resulted. There were actual results that ended up from those stories. So this story is one that's still developing. Although you saw again a Washington Post story on Wednesday night, which led to Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, on Friday recusing himself. So, I mean, if they are truly fake, then they're having some real results, So, I mean, I think that there is some truth to the stories, and they can complain, I think, about the aggressiveness of it, but I don't think, I mean, he's the President of the United States and should expect some degree of scrutiny.
We're getting some movement in Washington where Rex Tillerson is about to announce the new executive order on immigration. Let's listen in.
Protecting the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States is a vital measure for strengthening our national security. It is the President's solemn duty to protect the American people. And with this order, President Trump is exercising his rightful authority to keep our people safe. As threats to our security continue to evolve and change, common sense dictates that we continually reevaluate and reassess the systems we rely upon to protect our country. While no system can be made completely infallible, the American people can have high confidence we are identifying ways to improve the vetting process and thus keep terrorists from entering our country. To our allies and partners around the world, please understand this order is part of our ongoing efforts to eliminate vulnerabilities that radical Islamist terrorists can and will exploit for destructive ends. The State Department will coordinate with other federal agencies and implement these temporary restrictions in an orderly manner. Our embassies and consulates around the world will play an important role in making sure that our nation is as secure as it can be. And the State Department will implement the provisions in this order that allow for the admissions of refugees when it is determined they do not pose a risk to the security or welfare of the United States. Upon the President's initial executive order issued on January the 27th, the State Department's Consular Affairs and Diplomatic Security offices immediately undertook a review in coordination with the Department of Homeland Security to identify additional measures that would strengthen our vetting of those seeking entry to the United States from 7 named countries. These early efforts were concentrated on Iraq. Iraq is an important ally in the fight to defeat ISIS, with their brave soldiers fighting in close coordination with America's men and women in uniform. This intense review over the past month identified multiple security measures that the State Department and the government of Iraq will be implementing to achieve our shared objective of preventing those with criminal or terroristic intent from reaching the United States. I want to express my appreciation to Prime Minister al-Abadi of Iraq for his positive engagement and support for implementing these actions. The United States welcomes this kind of close cooperation with countries in every region of the world who share our commitment to national security. This revised order will bolster the security of the United States and her allies. Now, we've spent the morning briefing the Congress, the press, and we will continue to talk with key stakeholders this afternoon. Experts from the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, and the State Department hosted an hour-long call with the media on this topic this morning. Our collective teams will continue throughout the day to follow up with the Congress, the media, and stakeholders to answer your questions. I'll now turn it to the Attorney General for his comments.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and good morning to all of you. One of the Justice Department's top priorities is to protect the United States from threats to our national security. Therefore, I want to discuss 2 points. First, the national security basis of this order, and second, the Department of Justice's role in defending the lawful orders of the President of the United States. First, as President Trump noted in his address to Congress, the majority of people convicted in our courts for terrorism-related offenses since 9/11 came here from abroad. We also know that many people seeking to support or commit terrorist acts will try to enter through our refugee program. In fact, today more than 300 people, according to the FBI, who came here as refugees are under an FBI investigation today for potential terrorism-related activities. Like every nation, the United States has a right to control who enters our country and to keep out those who would do us harm. This executive order seeks to protect the American people as well as lawful immigrants by putting in place an enhanced screening and vetting process for visitors from 6 countries. 3 of these nations are state sponsors of terrorism. The other 3 have served as safe havens for terrorist countries where governments have lost control of their territory to terrorist groups like ISIL or Al-Qaeda and its affiliates. This increases the risk that people are admitted here from these countries may belong to terrorist groups or may have been radicalized by them. We cannot compromise our nation's security by allowing visitors entry when their own governments are unable or unwilling to provide the information we need to vet them responsibly, or when those governments actively support terrorism. This executive order responsibly provides a needed pause. We can carefully review how we scrutinize people coming here from these countries of concern. Second, the Department of Justice believes that this executive order, just as the first executive order, is a lawful and proper exercise of presidential authority. This Department of Justice will defend and enforce lawful orders of the President consistent with the core principles of our Constitution. The executive is empowered under the Constitution and by Congress to make national security judgments and to enforce our immigration policies in order to safeguard the American public. Terrorism is clearly a danger for America and our people. The President gets briefings on these dangers and emerging threats on a regular basis. The federal investigative agencies, the intelligence community, the Department of State, the Department of Homeland Security, and the United States military report to the President. Knowing the President would best possess such extensive information, our founders wisely gave the executive branch the authority and the duty to protect the nation. This executive order is a proper exercise of that power. Now, I will turn things over to our able Secretary John Kelly of the Department of Homeland Security. John?
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Well, like the Secretary of State and the Attorney General, I welcome you here today. My comments will be relatively brief. Last week, the Department of Homeland Security celebrated its 14th anniversary, first opening its doors on 1 March 2003. This Secretariat was established in response to the devastating attacks of September 11th, when foreign terrorists turned a beautiful but ordinary day into a nightmare. Those attacks taught us that we could not take our nation's security for granted, that Homeland Security must be our top priority, and that we needed to overcome our collective inability to connect the dots of intelligence and arrange them into a more comprehensive picture of the threats posed to America and our way of life. Though much has changed over the past 14 years, both in the world that is more dangerous and at DHS, which is much better. The fact remains that we are not immune to terrorist threats and that our enemies often use our own freedoms in generosity against us. Today's executive order, which President Trump signed this morning, will make America more secure and address long overdue concerns about the security of our immigration system. We must undertake a rigorous review and are undertaking a rigorous review of our immigration vetting programs to increase our confidence in the decisions we make relative to visitors and immigrants that travel to the United States. We cannot risk the prospect of malevolent actors using our immigration system to take American lives. This executive order is prospective in nature. Its focus is on preventing the entry of new foreign nationals from the 6 designated countries. Accordingly, it is important to note that nothing in this executive order affects existing lawful permanent residents or persons with current authorization to enter our homeland. Unregulated, unvetted travel is not a universal privilege, especially when national security is at stake. The White House worked closely with the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, and the Department of State to create an order that addresses previous concerns and protects the homeland and every one of our citizens. The men and women of the Department of Homeland Security, like their brothers and sisters throughout law enforcement, are decent men and women of character and conscience. They are no less so than the governors of our states and territories, of our senators and members of Congress,
of our city mayors and various advocacy groups. These men and women are sworn to enforce the laws as passed by the United States Congress and would be in violation of the law in their sworn oaths if they did not do so. We do not make the law, but are sworn to enforce it. We have no other option. We are going to work closely to implement and enforce it humanely, respectfully, and with professionalism, but we will enforce the law. I want to thank the President for his leadership on this issue and for his steadfast support for our important law enforcement, security, and counterterrorism mission. Again, as previously mentioned, I have spent much of the day today on the phone with members of Congress, the leadership, explaining the ins and outs of this EO, and I did the same thing last week. So there should be no surprises, whether it's in the media or on Capitol Hill. Thanks very much, and thanks for your time.
Is this an acknowledgement that the first order was flawed in many ways and not well thought through?
Mr. Attorney General, have you spoken to FBI Director Comey today?
Are Christians still given priority under this executive order for review?
A trio of the power players in the Trump administration, the Homeland Security Director there, John Kelly, along with the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Attorney General Jeff Sessions, announcing the new travel ban as implemented by the Trump administration. Let's get back to our panel, Matt Visor and Rich Lowry. Rich, did you hear anything there that gives you confidence that the courts are going to look with a kinder eye on this travel ban?
Well, I was struck by a couple things. One, having this announced by 3 cabinet secretaries reinforces the message that they have their ducks in a row this time. This has been carefully coordinated among all agencies of government. 2, they're exempting Iraq. The inclusion of Iraq in the first order didn't seem to make a lot of sense, given that we're waging a war with Iraq against ISIS. And Attorney General Sessions went out of his way to say the FBI is investigating 300 refugees for suspicion of terroristic activities, which goes to the weak defense that the Department of Justice mounted initially of the first executive order, where lawyers didn't even seem to know what the answer was when judges asked, well, what's the threat we're addressing here? So they're still going to have a problem with the courts. They're still going to have a problem with activist courts, but this is much more buttoned up and should be much more defensible.
To that point, Matt, the Attorney General gave a pretty vocal defense of the actions that are being taken here, saying the Department of Justice believes it is in the president's authority to protect the nation, and that's the source of these orders.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I agree with Rich. I mean, I think that the rollout of this is far different from the rollout of the initial executive order. You also, as I understand it, have a 10-day period before a lot of this is implemented. So you have time. You heard Secretary Tillerson emphasize that they are talking to the public. They're talking to members of Congress. They're talking to the media. There's a much different emphasis on how this is rolled out. It's still to be seen. There's surely going to be court challenges to this, whether these changes sort of button up the legal aspects of it. You know, I'm not a legal expert, but it seems like they are meant to address some of the shortcomings of that initial executive order.
They also took pains to say that they briefed members of Congress, Rich, and that was something that apparently didn't get done the first time around.
Yeah, they just want everyone to know, and to know what the new rules are so they can be implemented as smoothly as possible. And the courts shouldn't be making decisions on the basis of whether a rollout is chaotic or smooth, but unfortunately it does affect the perception of judges, and the administration didn't help its case with that chaotic first weekend. Now, I thought the first order was entirely legal and constitutional, and it was absurd that the Ninth Circuit threw it out, but this should, at least at the margins, help the administration's case going forward. And it was important to get out of that Ninth Circuit legal box canyon they are and try to reset this and fight it going forward on slightly different footing.
Matt, I guess I'm asking you to look at your crystal ball a little bit here, but you know, the media, the administration did not get treated well in the media as a result of that first rollout. There were a lot of editorials and so forth against it. How do you think this one's going to be received?
I mean, I think it'll be a little bit different because they've made pains to respond. I mean, I think the initial one, you also had those images in the days after of the airports and the protests there. So I think that you won't have that the same way this time. So I mean, I think the rollout is different here, and I think that changes public perception of some of the things that they're doing, even if it has some of the same aims. Also watch for how they talk about this. In the aftermath of that initial one, there was still talk of a Muslim ban. They seem to be taking pains to clarify that a little bit here, where it's not religious specific that the courts used. So I think watch that over the next couple of hours and days too.
Matt Visor, Boston Globe, Rich Lowry, National Review. Thank you
very much, John.
Thank you.
Just talked a little bit about the airports. The Trump administration's initial travel ban sparked an outcry with protests erupting at airports across the country. A different scene.